I've been upstairs putting up pumpkins today. I ate my dinner and then I was going to take a little break. Of course, I'm kind of bummed out that I didn't get any snow. It looked like we were going to get some this time, but no snow. At least not yet. Maybe I'll have some when the next storm rolls through. But I was thinking about snow and I was reminded of a story, and I decided I wanted to share it with you. It was about a lady who walked in the snow barefooted. Now, she didn't just walk in the snow barefooted because she didn't have any shoes. You know, sometimes that's the case, especially in days gone by. But she thought it was good for your health to walk in the snow, the first snow of the year, barefooted. So I'm going to share that story with you. It's just a short one, but really interesting. And this is from the book, John Paris. This is his book, Mountain Bread, which is really just a collection of many of his newspaper articles that he wrote over the years. He wrote for the Asheville Citizen, and he wrote primarily, really only about Western North Carolina. So really a fantastic writer, and of course, being from the same general area, I love his writings. He's one of my favorite writers when it comes to really documenting the people and the culture of southern Appalachia. She walks barefooted in the snow, Hurricane Creek. Around the weathered old cabin, a prophetic wind throbbed like a muted trumpet. It whispered of winter and of snow. It drifted through a crack under the door and eddied about the ankles of the old woman sitting before the fire. Nancy Rathbone, the flickering flames red on her graying hair and her Madonna-like face, stared a moment at the blazing hickory knots in the great stone fireplace. Her rough old hands that have an affinity for the hoe and the axe, lay in her lap like a cat napping. "The wind," she said, as if speaking to the fire, "is getting up. It won't be long now until the woods is all quilted down and the snow comes drifting into the hollow." She shifted her tired old bones in the split-bottom chair. For a moment she cocked her head to one side, like she had heard the whisper of a voice at the door and was waiting for it to speak out again. "You know," she said, "when the first good snow comes, a snow that's about shoe-mouth deep, I get out in it and wade about in it barefooted. Been doing it since I was big enough to toddle about, and I'm nigh on to 73. She paused and grinned, then uttered a little cackle. "Reckon you think I'm a mite tetched in the head," she said. "Well, it could be that I am, but I'll tell you one thing, and it's a fact as true as Scripture. I'm one that never has a cold in the winter, never have had one, and don't expect to get one as long as I'm able to walk. If you contrary what I tell you, just try it when the first good ground-covering snow comes. Get out in it barefooted and walk about for 10 minutes or so. You do that and you'll never have a cold. All of my folks will tell you it's so. Walk barefooted in the first snow and you'll not have a cold the whole long winter." Of course, there's them that don't believe it, but they're folks that ain't never tried it. Besides, some of 'em are so cold-natured they get the chills just at the mention of walking barefooted in the snow. Take my old man, for instance. Why, he's brogued these hills in snow up to his knees, cutting timber and other things I won't mention. But he ain't about to lay aside his shoes and bare his feet to snow. And come winter, he'll get himself a cold, and I'll have to get out my herb medicine and doctor him." By now the wind was a roar in the late autumn afternoon, swirling about the cabin in gusts as it swept into the cove from the heights of the Newfound Mountains here in the wild back reaches of Haywood County. "Why," she said, "all the old folks when I was a-growing up back in the Big Bend of the Pigeon saw to it that their children was put out barefooted when the first snow come. And I can tell you right here and now that I'll keep right on stepping out into the first snow of winter as long as the good Lord will give me strength to walk." Beside her chair as she talked was a basket of herbs that she reached into now and then and sorted out on the floor at her feet. "We don't have no doctors up here," she said. "We've got to depend on home remedies. It ain't like it is down in the valley. When a body gets sick, you have to make do with what the good Lord give you. Besides, a heap of folks don't need a doctor when they call one. I've been dependent on herbs all my life. So has a lot of other folks hereabouts. I'd say, for the most part, folks back here in the mountains is a heap healthier than them that lives down in the cities where they can get a doctor in no time at all. I've got a thought that folks have got so used to the easy way that they're prime subjects for any little ailment that comes along. When a body don't have to turn a hand to do a thing, you might as well mark 'em up for a passel of ailments. Although she didn't mention it, Nancy Rathbone can and does wield an axe and a hoe. It's nothing to her way of thinking to get out in the woods and help her husband get up the winter firewood. Why, she thinks nothing of lifting up a log that would stagger an ordinary man, says Jim Henry, the Salvation Army man up at the Maple Springs Mission. She's strong as a mule and just as stubborn, tough as a hickory. And when I mention to her that she ought to slow down, she just looks at me and shakes her head. Because of her knowledge of herbs, Nancy Rathbone is doctor to the folks of this wild, high mountain land. And when folks get sick and send for her, she goes without question, no matter how dark the night or how bad the weather. You might say she's just about the most important person in all these hills, for there are times when her ministrations are the difference between life and death. If folks would listen to me, she said, if they would do what I tell 'em, there'd be a heap less sickness among 'em, and they'd have a heap less ailments. Like, she said, if they'd get out and walk barefooted in the first snow, they wouldn't have a cold the whole winter long. Really interesting story there about Nancy Rathbone. And of course at first you think, well, how silly is that? And I'm certainly not saying if you walk in the snow that you wouldn't have a cold. I can't say that. But I do think it's interesting that like she said, you might think I'm a mite touched in the head. Seems so silly, doesn't it? But you know what's all the rage today makes me think of is the polar, it's not polar, but the ice bath. It always makes me think of the polar plunge when people was doing that. That was way back when Corey and Katie was in high school. But people sit in the ice baths, or they go ice swimming, into the creeks and the rivers and things in the wintertime, and it's supposed to be good for your health. I'm sure there's a term for it that I'm not thinking of. But anyway, it's kind of the same thing, like her walking in the snow. So I guess that's one of those examples of what's old is new again. Now, someone who would not agree with that at all would be Granny. Oh my goodness, Granny would just be... She'd be all up in the air if I told her that I was going to start walking in the snow barefooted for my health. Granny's the sort of person that thinks you shouldn't even wash your hair and go outside with it still damp because you might take cold. So she wouldn't be going along with that at all for any reason. Now, because we don't get much snow where I live here in the southern mountains of Appalachia, thinking about growing up, and of course in those days too, thinking about kids when you're kids, and we weren't the wealthiest people or anything, but there was certainly no need for big, you think about if you was going skiing, or if you lived in a place where you got a lot of snow, thinking about really, warm clothes like that. There just wasn't much need for them. But then when it did snow, of course, us kids, we wanted to stay outside all day long and sled and build snowmans and have snowball fights and come in and warm by the fire and then go out and do it all over again. We'd have to hang our stuff up and let it dry. And we usually would put on, maybe we'd put on if we had a pair of knit pants or something, or maybe long johns, and we put our pants, our blue jeans over that, and if you were put 2 or 3 shirts on, and if you were lucky to have a big coat, and of course we had toboggans, we had gloves that never stayed, they instantly got wet. Sometimes we would use bread bags. We would put bread bags over, like put a pair of socks on, put a bread bag, and then put your shoes on. Or maybe put another sock over that bread bag. Sometimes we do that on our hands too. Because once you get wet, of course, then you really get cold, and sledding, of course, when you're kids, you get wet. But it makes me think of all those sort of memories. I do hope I get a snow this winter. Maybe I will. We've not really had any snow to amount to anything in several years now. So maybe this will be the year. And maybe, just maybe, I'll walk in it barefooted. I hope you enjoyed this little story about Nancy Rathbone from John Paris. I'm always glad when you stop by to help me celebrate Appalachia. What are you doing, Banks? What? What? You gonna sit on the wood pile? You gonna sit on the wood pile? I don't think leaves are too good to eat, are they?